All right, so thank you everybody for coming. Welcome to weeks 210. Today I'm going to be talking about, as you can see, Laurie Frink's method of trumpet instruction. And for those of you who don't know, Laurie Frink is one of the most important brass teachers of the last 25 years. She taught in New York City and Manhattan, and taught at a bunch of different schools in Manhattan, as well as New England Conservatory in Boston. And she was pretty much world-renowned for her abilities as a chop doctor, as a pedagogue, as a teacher for brass instrumentalists, trumpet, trombone, etc. And basically she was and I studied with her personally. And so my DMA project was to research what her method was and to sort of to figure out what she was giving, because she never really published anything that was definitive about this is what I do, this is how I teach, this is how it goes. And also she passed away in 2013, I believe, and she lost her battle with cancer, for those who are interested in that. But it was a big blow to the trumpet community, especially in New York City, for those of us who studied with her pretty much on a weekly basis. So my research project, basically over the last 3 years, was to collect materials that she produced, and one of the most important aspects that enabled this research project to happen was that she wrote down in her own handwriting routines for her students at every lesson, and so every time you would go in, you would play some stuff, and you would leave with a sheet, and it would basically say, do these things in this order every day until you see me next, and then you go see her again, and she would hear some of those things, and she would give you a different sheet that was kind of the same, kind of different. And so there are a lot of these running around. And this is, it's not a new thing for teachers to write down stuff for their students to play. In fact, there's quite a long tradition of writing things down over and over and over. And a big example of that is like the Schlossberg book, for example, is one of our most important texts as brass players, and that is essentially a compilation of student notes. And so that's kind of what I've done with this research project, and the product of my project was, I call it a taxonomy because it's sort of an index with annotation of sort of what I found, and what I found was very interesting and very cool, and definitely going to talk about that. That's pretty much my topic for today. So yeah, Laurie Frink, she was, everyone called her Trumpet Mother, and she was very endearing, she was very warm, and you were guaranteed to see somebody leave the studio before you go in with a smile on their face. No one ever left unhappy. So, we had it. She was originally from Nebraska, Pender, Nebraska. She studied classical trumpet with Dennis Schneider, who was the principal trumpet of the Lincoln Symphony. And there was actually a recent paper finished this year. I actually worked with this guy a little bit from LSU. He did a paper on Dennis Schneider. His name's Louis Eckert. And he's graduating this year and defended and lectured, I believe, last week. Anyways, he was more of definitely a classical trumpet player, and she grew up and studied classical trumpet before moving to New York City, which is when she started studying with Caruso, who became a huge influence on her and subsequently on her teaching and her teaching style. When she was in New York, she played mostly like lead trumpet shows. She played on radio jingles. She played like with David Bowie, Talking Heads. She did all kinds. She did the New York freelance thing, and I got a picture here, and of course, the important part's cut off. Didn't work. Well, that's too bad. But that's young Laurie Frink, part of it on the right. She was born in 1904. So when talking about Laurie Frink, we definitely have to talk about, can everybody see the slides with me standing here, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. So when talking about Laurie Frink, we definitely have to talk about Caruso. And he was originally a virtuoso, or a prodigy pianist. He took a violin, settled on the saxophone, and he started teaching brass students in 1942. And he quickly became a very renowned and successful brass teacher. Not necessarily because he was a brass player, because he wasn't, but because of his teaching methodology. And basically with that, what the claim to fame is there is that Caruso is about calisthenic training. And what that means is that it's training similar to how an athlete would train, that you train rudimentary motions and you get them coordinated, and so you focus on timing. And a quote from him: "When playing an instrument, the musician is dealing with numerous body motions. It's the synchronization of these motions that produces the desired results. Synchronization requires perfect timing of all muscular movements. Therefore, timing is of the utmost importance." And so that is a very good summary of Caruso and of the Caruso way. And we can see here I have what I call the Caruso school. And this is a very basic outline of people who studied. So we can see here Laurie Frink, Julie Landsman, Marcus Stockhouse. They studied directly with Carmine Caruso. Julie Landsman is a French horn player. She teaches at Juilliard, plays with Orpheus Chamber. She also has a really great video series talking about the Carmine Caruso method, and I used that as a very, essentially a primary source and an authority on the Caruso method. And then Marcus Stockhausen studied with Carmine Caruso for a month, but that month basically changed his life and his career, which speaks for itself. And now we have Laurie Frink, and two people who studied with her, who we know are John McNeil and Dave Ballou, are two people. Dave Ballou teaches at Towson University, and John McNeil is up at NEC. And John McNeil is well known for the Flexus book, which is, I think a lot of people know about the Flexus book, and it's something that Laurie co-authored along with him, and the subtitle is Calisthenics for the Modern Improviser. And so that book has a lot of exercises that are similar to what I found in Laurie's notes, and it has a lot of good variations on those exercises, and it sort of goes in different areas than either Caruso or Frink. And so the Flexus book is also an excellent resource when talking about the Caruso school. And also a little known down here, Woody Shaw apparently studied with Carmine Caruso at some point and attributed a lot of his success to that. Professor Lynch for letting me know that, so that's cool. All right, so what we're really here for is we're talking about Laurie Frink's method. And basically, when I started this project, I had to say, okay, what do we know? What do we know about her method? And so there are a couple of documents that are floating around. The first one we have here, right here, is called an integrated warm-up. And this was a document that was floating around in New York. And I believe, and I don't know this for certain, but I'm fairly certain that it was associated somehow with New York University because of the font and the color. They matched New York University's font and color, school color. And I know that she was involved with New York University. That's where I studied with her. And but anyways, an integrated warm-up is a collection of exercises she put together. And in the foreword, she attributes them to various established sources such as Clark and Chikowitz and things like that. And what it is it's a series of 5 levels, and the 5 levels have the same exercise in the same orders, but they just are extended in range in each level. And she says that an integrated warm-up was basically a way to bring the embouchure to focus so that you can go about your day and you can play with good response, with good articulation, with even sound across all registers, and with good flexibility. And so that's an important document. It has a couple of things that we find in her handwritten lesson notes, and it has a bunch of things that are already published, such as there's some violin exercises, there's Clark exercises, there's Chikowitz, and strangely enough, there's very little. I think there's only one Caruso exercise in an integrated warm-up, and that's the very basic level of harmonics, and it's at the very end of level 5. So the next thing we have here is the Caruso method taught by Laurie Frink. Here is the title page from that. And this is a document that Professor Lynch found, and it was in Ronald Rahm's studio book, and it was contributed by Dr. Michael Ewald to that book, according to Rahm, after attending a master class. And what is in this document is basically the first few lessons of the Caruso method, and it's very similar to the few lessons you find in the published Caruso book, but it also includes some extended variations, and it's a good resource for the actual Caruso method. There's some notes on how to do them that are not in the published book, so this is another thing that's by Laurie Frink. She was kind of considered the foremost authority on Carmine Caruso, and I would say that she and Julie Landsman probably were the most qualified people to teach and talk about that. Flexus is a book. It was co-authored by Frink, and John McNeil said that it was like maybe 75% his, and the rest was hers stuff that was contributed to the book. I don't know whether or not that's true. There certainly are a lot of similarities between the things she would assign and what you would find in that book. But Flexus has fairly conclusive forwards on each section, and so is a pretty good resource for figuring out what to do with everything in it. And then we have master classes. She gave 2 master classes. Well, there were 3. There was one in 1999 and 2 in 2000 that were recorded. But all 3 of those were for ITG, the International Trumpet Guild. And the one that was in 1999 was more of a presentation of Caruso, and then the 2 following had her basically demonstrating things including Caruso on a participant in front of everybody. And then the final thing we have, what I talked about a little bit before, are the lesson notes. And these, I think, are probably the most important thing we have out of all of this, because there are so many of them out there. In my research, I accumulated 157 of these sheets, and based on what I found, it's fairly remarkable. I found very consistent. I found a lot of consistent things across all these, and so it was very exciting to go through this project and find that across all these people and all these times and all these lessons that, even the date was in the same place. And so it was she had a very methodical, well thought out way of teaching. So we touched on this a little bit before. We see here, this was also the Facebook cover photo, and this is my very first exercise that I got on my very first lesson sheet is this. But the things that are important about the lesson sheets are that, 1, they're written by hand for each student by Frink at every lesson. And they were the basis for their study of the week, and that was her assignment to them. These lesson sheets, they drew from a very consistent group of exercises, which I'll show, and there are distinct patterns in ordering and variation amongst those. And there's consistent naming and notation of everything in them. So as a whole, they represent a very accurate look on sort of what she was writing down and having her students play. Now, you've all been wondering, here's an example of what some of these look like. They have this Laurie Frink up here, and what's really interesting is that this is like highly degraded by photocopy. So she's had these sheets for probably a really long time. So we have the date up here. Interestingly enough, there's never a year on pretty much any of them. But we can see here, there's buzzing, nodes, bend study, 6 notes, spider, and here's this Goldman and add slurry. And then we have, similar things here. We have like the bend study. I'm going to talk about all these, of course. Here's 6 notes again, seconds. This is what's called bending pedals, and this is her shorthand for chromatic scale. Have another pair. We have more things. We have, here's chromatic scale again, 6 notes again, telling you how to do the interval studies here. We have the developed scale. We have more bends. We have the noodle that's actually written out and shown to do in like single time, double time, triple time. And then down here we have harmonics. And here we have handwriting of the student, whoever it was, because it doesn't really look like that. I'll assume that that's the student. Another important thing about these is that they were pretty much always in treble clef, even the ones I got from trombone students, treble clef. So now we get to my research, and here we have some science going on here. And by that I mean I went through these sheets and I figured out in what percent of these sheets were these particular exercises present. And you might be asking yourself, what are these exercises? Well, these 10 core exercises are the things that I found to exist almost exclusively within these notes. Of course, there's a small amount of outside material, including etudes, things from like irons, violin, etc. But the large majority consists of these things. And you can see here that, like, the buzzing exercise, 97% of those sheets had buzzing in them. So that's why I consider that to be an important exercise, and so etc. Then we have things down here that are a little smaller, and what these basically represent are things that, like, if this was there, that wasn't, or if this was there, that wasn't, or there's a group of things here that sort of occupy the same function in the routine, and so therefore one would be there and maybe another wouldn't, for the sake of balance. Here's another picture demonstrating excellent posture. So, here we have the rules. So, when we talk about this, part of my research involves going through the established trumpet literature and figuring out what exercises these she borrowed from, basically where these things exist outside of what she wrote. And in finding those, I try to figure out if there's anything published as to the form and how to do these and what they were for and what their nature was. And that was how I established sort of how to do each of these exercises as explained in my taxonomy. But so we have some basic rules for doing the Frink method, and I want to make this a little different than the Caruso method because there's Caruso in Frink, but there's also other things. So the first thing is we have Caruso rules. And so some of you may be familiar with what those mean. But basically what that means is when you say do Caruso rules, that implies a very specific group of things that you do. And the first of which is that you tap your foot, timing. And the second of which is that the mouthpiece doesn't come off of your face during the entire exercise. And the third is that you keep the blow steady at all times. And then the fourth is that you only breathe through the nose so that you don't disrupt anything on the face. And that's also sometimes referred to as the long setting. And with pretty much everything, timing, as Carmine said, is of the utmost importance. And so that's why we have this tapping of the foot. When Laurie would teach the Caruso exercises, she would always say that you should be subdividing before your entrance. And that's actually something that I found to be very helpful in performance too, where you're coming in a note, da, 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 da. You know exactly where to put it. You see drummers doing it in the air before they come in. That's something that you can use in all of these. Now the second thing I want to talk about is the concept of bending or glissando. And in a lot of these exercises, and in a lot of exercises across the world of brass pedagogy and trumpet pedagogy, we have people bending and slurring and doing all kinds of things. And what Frink means when she says to bend or to gliss is more of the Thompson approach, for those of you who know. And what that means is to have a very, very balanced journey between where you're starting and where you're ending, where you're getting a very smooth sound. You're hitting everything in between, and everything is very gradual and even in time. Whereas sometimes people go da ha, but it's da. So I'll demonstrate. That's nice. So one way to bend would be, and what Frink would prefer is, we're getting everything in between, and that would translate to really working to travel the distance, as opposed to would be the way. That is a way to do it, but that is not the way that she would have you do it. And then for glissando, she had this thing she would say, think about it like a stick in bicycle tire spokes, and how all the notes you want to hit on your glissando are going to be hit perfectly evenly, and you're going to hit everything on the way up and the way down. You want to hit everything that way. And so that's what she means by glissando, instead of simply just a rip. In many cases, a rip might occupy all those notes and be excellent in that way, but she would say really focus on, even though it's a glissando, it still is timed. There still is time. The third thing we talk about here is the training mentality, and this is, I think, one of the big differentiating factors between the Caruso school and the Frink system and sort of other ways of teaching, in that the training mentality means that you're doing these exercises in good form, and you're doing them the way they're prescribed, and that in and of itself is success in doing these exercises, rather than doing the exercise with the goal of doing it perfectly, or not missing any notes, or going as high as you went yesterday or the day before. It's merely a matter of going through with the correct form, and that over time these things will build upon themselves, and then you'll reap the benefits. And so that's what I mean by the training mentality. So if you're sitting there and you're doing seconds, and and today I didn't get as high as I went yesterday, but I try to force myself up there, and then I feel bad the rest of the day, that's sort of the wrong way to approach them. You said, did I do with the right form? Did I tap my foot? Did I do everything the way I was supposed to? Great, let's move on. Success. So that's what we call the training mentality. Now, etudes, those were something that she referred to as performance art, and they were something that were very infrequently given. And almost always they were things of a technical nature that were dealing with tonguing, which is something that is probably less present in her method than in other methods, is the application of tonguing. And etudes were something that were, you didn't have to do them at a certain time. They weren't necessarily part of your lesson sheet, but they were still something she wanted you to do. And then you would get into your lesson, you'd be like, oh great, I got to play this thing and I can't get through it. She'd stop you halfway, say good job, you'd never play it again. So it wasn't really about playing it all the way through. It was still a training tool. It was still a training mentality. And then this final option we have here is existing student warm-ups. Now, those of you who know me know that I have a warm-up that I like to do, and I like to say it a lot, and I'm not going to say it here. But she, when I came in, thank you, good laugh. She would not tell you that you had to stop everything you were doing and do what she wanted you to do. You were allowed to do your other stuff, so long as you were, doing her stuff too. And and I have an interesting story where she said, why don't you come to me, next time and don't do your thing before you come? And I did, and it was okay. And then throughout the rest of the week, I didn't do the thing, and then at the end of the week, I couldn't play trumpet anymore. So there we have it. Some people have to do their thing, and she wouldn't stop you from doing that. And I guess another important thing to mention is that it goes along with this last option here, is that what she was giving was not the total sum of your daily or weekly practice. It was merely just a part. And that she knew that you were practicing your repertoire, you were practicing music for your ensembles, you were going to rehearsals. There were a lot of other things that you were going to do in addition to what she gave. And I would say on average, her routine would probably take between 30 and 90 minutes, depending upon how much she gave and how much time you spent doing it. So there we have it. Oh, okay, one other thing that I neglected to mention is that something that's part of the Caruso method is what we call a breath attack. Some people say an air attack. And what that really is just starting the pitch without any tongue. So, beautiful. Would be a breath attack. And nothing more. And so some people, and I know that some people will say, that a breath attack is different from an air attack, and that sometimes you go poo instead of who. And simply all this was, say M and blow until it vibrates. And that's the Caruso principle. And that's what we mean when we say breath attack. And that breath attack is a large part of the Caruso exercises. So now we get to the really exciting part. We're going to start talking about these things. So buzzing is the first exercise of these core 10 that I want to talk about. And buzzing was something that was typically first on a routine. And that's a little different from how Julie Landsman taught. She would always have 6 notes be first. And that's interesting because they're sort of two parallels in this Caruso school, and that's what differentiates Frink from Caruso. The buzzing we have here is she writes on her lesson sheets, I don't know if you notice it, but it would say 1 lips, 2 mouthpiece, 3 horn. And these were designed you buzz them, you free buzz them, and then you play them on the mouthpiece in all 7 positions, and then on the horn in all 7 positions. And they're used to establish balance, focused aperture, and Landsman's claims that they improve pitch center and projection in her students. They're used as sort of a warm-up or preliminary exercise, and generally people would have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of these. And an interesting note about the buzzing is that not everybody is an accomplished free buzzer, and certainly some, and Frink's, she would say, try it, see if it gets better. But it wouldn't necessarily be a make or break situation. That she said she has a lot of people who can free buzz around the world, and then people who can't free buzz at all. And it's not really indicative of their ability or potential, but it's simply just a training tool. And so and Landsman says that if the free buzzing creates excess tension, leave it out. So here we have the most basic version that she would always give is this top one, which is we're just buzzing always with the glissando concept I talked about. And you're allowed to tongue it or breath attack. It doesn't really matter. There's no real Caruso rules here. And then we have one that goes up a little higher, one that goes down a little higher, and then variation D here is a famous one because it's the first few notes of the Jeopardy theme. And she would always say Jeopardy. She would write, oh, this is the Jeopardy one. She would write that in your notes. And then they go on from here, and they go all over the place. But I will demonstrate that. So. So forth. I'm really taking my time, especially on the way back up. So there we have variation A. It's interesting to note that there are buzzing concepts present in James Thompson's book. There are buzzing concepts present in the Stamp book, and they all, most of them involve this half-step concept initially, and the Stamp students are famous for accompanying themselves on the piano. Of course, they have play-along tracks now, and the Thompson book, which is that thing that I wasn't going to say, has a recording that you play along with. So now let me do the Jeopardy. And an interesting part of Jeopardy is that sometimes she would tell you not glissando when you're on the horn. Etc. Yeah, and that's what we have here. There's buzzing. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a fairly important exercise. Is what I call the bend study. And the bend study exists in 4 parts. So A, B, C, and D is one bend study. As far as I can tell, this is an original exercise that Frink developed or drew from other locations that are dissimilar. Places where things like this kind of exist are number 54 in Tom Stevens' After Schlossberg book. Sort of resembles this concept. And in Mike Sachs' book, page 51, number 1, is something that also kind of resembles this concept, neither in this level of detail or this complete. But the purpose of this is that it improves interval accuracy. You can see that we're always descending chromatically, and then when we ascend, we're going up like in larger than half steps. And so what that does is that sort of tricks the body into thinking the intervals are smaller and closer together. And it extends the middle setting into the lower register, trains playing in the center to be reflexive. You're always coming down, you're bending, you're going back up. And after you do, for example, this one, you've played every note from that G to the low G, and you've bent it and made it centered, and then gone to another interval within that space of time. So you basically played a centered version of everything, from everything to everything, once you've finished the bend study. We see with my notation here, I have this little guy. What that is a bend. So we're bending this half step whenever that exists. And the rest of these are slurred. What else do we have here? Yeah, this exercise generally occurs like in the middle of lesson sheets. It's not something that you have like first. You would usually do like you do the buzzing, you would do 6 notes, maybe something else, and then the bend study. And it's sort of a combination between a flexibility exercise and a flow exercise and a long tone exercise, and it's an interesting exercise. The variations they start just on the next highest open partial. So the next one would start on C and go down an octave, and then we'll start on E and go down an octave, and then when you do G on top, once that's comfortable, that one can be extended to be 2 octaves down, and that gets very interesting. If you have when I was doing this and I had trouble with the 2 octave getting from the high G to the low G, you could glissandi between to sort of make that connection happen. And these are played in. What I wrote there is not right. We'll ignore. So I'll demonstrate a little bit of version A. Etc. And then version B. Version C. And the final version. So that would be a bend study.
Just a quick question
Yes.
on this. You're speeding up a lot in the quarters. Is that typical, or are you just doing that to save time? Is that how you would actually play them?
A little of both. When I was first doing these, it was very much in time, everything the same, take breaths when needed. And once I got more comfortable with it, like you notice I didn't have to look at it to play it.
Yeah.
Once I got more comfortable with it, so long as I'm paying attention to the timing and using time and it being in time, then you can do it. I've adapted it so I can do it in one breath,
Yeah.
all of them, as I find it's less
And if you do take a
disruptive.
breath, do you keep do you do the nose or just a regular breath?
No, not gonna. This is, yeah, definitely not a Caruso thing. I suppose that if you or a student of yours had issues with placement, you could use those. And that's something that Julie Landsman talks about frequently in her videos, is that, you know, if some of my advanced students don't need the Caruso rules on this exercise, and some of them do. And so it's kind of that's part of Frank, because it would be a case by case basis. I was never made to use the Caruso rules on this, but I'm sure people were.
Yeah, great, thank you.
So moving on, so 6 notes. This right here is the bread and butter of Caruso, and it almost, it looks basically like it did in the Caruso book. This first one, version A, this uses all the Caruso rules we talked about. So we're tapping our foot, we're breathing through our nose, we're not taking it off in between, we're keeping the air steady. And the idea behind this exercise was to train the embouchure to be able to move up and down, to move within the mouthpiece without resetting the mouthpiece. And some common misconceptions for the Caruso exercises were that you hold static, or that you don't move, or that you tense up. But really, you can relax and do whatever you need to do, but you definitely want to sort of minimize your movement. Over here. Yeah, so what this does, it stabilizes the embouchure, it allows it to come into focus before adding motion, and it teaches the body the relative position of each of these notes and makes them feel closer together, and helps to achieve good balance with the chops, air, and time. That's what Lansman says. So I will demonstrate a little bit. This happens usually in the beginning third of routines. We have it. So, and sit, because if I were to tap my foot standing up, that would not be good. So, come off my foot maybe. I'm going faster than I would normally go. I think that sometimes for some of the variations, like for example, if I were to do it, like what I do now is I do from C in the staff to G on top, I go a little bit faster, just for endurance purposes. We have, you can see some variations down here. These are sort of the first 2 variations you would get. The original version simply repeats from G to C twice. And the next variation, when you do the C, you jump down an octave and come back up. The third variation, you jump down the octave, you go up, then you jump down another octave and come back up. After that, she would assign, probably like middle C to E above that. You do that for a little bit, and then the middle C to the G on top, and then sometimes the low C to the high C. I didn't really find anything beyond high C in the lesson notes I came across. The Flexus book has variations that only go to high C. And then there are people, I know through Philippe, that there are people who do it like from low G to high G sometimes. And definitely, people I've experimented with, for example, the Bill Adam routine has these long tones that go up and down half steps. I've experimented with doing that all the way with this same principle. And it's an interesting exercise. So here, interval study. This is another Caruso exercise. It involves the same principles. Use a long setting, which like I said, are these Caruso rules where you don't remove the instrument, you breathe through your nose. This one is called seconds because they're seconds. And the way that they exist in the Caruso method is they're all diatonic. And the way that they exist in the Flexus book are also diatonic. But when you actually did them with Frink, she would say, just make sure you're doing the interval that you planned on doing. So sometimes when I do fourths, I do all perfect fourths. Or when I get to really high and get to break area notes, I'll go chromatically. So it's really an ear thing. It's as long as you know what you're doing and you're planning, say I'm going to do this interval, and then you do it, then it doesn't necessarily have to be diatonic. but as far as Caruso is concerned, they're diatonic. And so this involves the same principles as before. We have a breath attack, but you're moving between an interval. And when you get to larger intervals, the tendency would be to sort of lurch between notes, to go da ha ha, sort of a thing. And Frink would always say to really treat it, say glissando if you have to, but at all costs, don't lurch between notes. This one here, Lansman says this is specific upper register training, and it is because you go as high as possible. So it's cut off, which is great. And this is also done softly. A lot of people do this, mezzo forte or louder. But what Frink would say do this as soft as humanly possible to make it just the smallest mosquito music. And in doing so, you're writing the dead center of where you're supposed to be, and from there you would expand outwards. And so that's definitely a different approach that she had to other people. When I got this exercise from John Harner, who studied with Caruso, and he was a lead trumpet player, played with like Kenton tribute bands, and he would say, do it mezzo forte, do it comfortably, but do it at a place that's comfortable for you to play. And so for him that was really, really loud because he could do that. But Frink would always have it done softly, and I've definitely seen improved results with trying to keep it soft instead of trying to shock your body into doing something with force. You're using sort of finesse and control. And I have here another thing that says second set. And so what that means is you take this as high as you can go until no air comes out, keeping a steady blow. And you take it off, and you defog your glasses. And then you pick up at the next like a solid place that you got to slightly below that, and you continue higher. And that's what we call the second set. And that's sort of that's like a training, like a physical training thing where it's like, oh, do a superset. That's basically what it is. So I will demonstrate. Resisting the urge to open up my sound, try to keep it. And so on the days when seconds are really great and really go, they're effortless. I'm not straining, and I'm just sort of like a violinist. I'm just gliding between these notes, and I'm not. It's none of this to make it happen. And those are the days where those are exciting days. And I wish I had more of them. All right, tongue brush. This is called tongue brushing. What you would call it. This is related to a Caruso exercise called the developed scale, and the reason why we have tongue brushing is because Frink would say that the developed scale was too challenging for a lot of people who came to her, and what this works on is that it works on combining sort of the mouth position of tonguing and slurring, and tries to make them sort of the same thing. A problem that a lot of people had, and I certainly had and have, is that when I'm tonguing something and I'm slurring something, I'm using two physically different approaches. And so by simply alternating tonguing and slurring, what we're doing is we're calisthenically training those to be the same, to make them efficient. What do we have here? This is done with Caruso rules, and it unifies the physical mechanisms using tonguing and slurring, and therefore improves the consistency and endurance of attack. And so that's what we have. This is found usually in the last portion of lesson sheets, and you play up and back down. You single tongue it, and the first way to do it would be to use a very long tenuto legato tongue, and then you could add in other styles of tonguing. For me, I could peck them away no problem, so I would do them legato. So I will demonstrate. Oh, and also another thing to note is that this is also done in intervals, so you can do seconds, thirds, fourths. I think I have down here, like version B, C, and D, we have slightly bigger intervals. Etc. And then you come back down. And these can get, sometimes she would be mean and say, like, do it to high F and back. This is one of the few exercises that she gave that dealt with articulation at all. As we saw, all the Caruso ones have a breath attack involved, and then what we'll see later on is that most of these deal with flexibility and coordination with the air. And so tongue brushing is important because it is basically, outside of etudes, is one of the only things that deals actually with articulating. And again, this is, I think, an important difference between the Frink method and other trumpet methods is that, for example, in After Schlossberg, there's a phenomenal amount of tonguing, and that's a very good thing in that way. And it's interesting to note that with the Frink method, there is not very much tonguing. I'm going to change it. Look at that. All right. So this is what we have our notes. This is related to what I'm going to talk about later, which is harmonics. This is similar to Thompson's number 4, Thompson's number 9, and it's also related to exercise 3C in the stamp book. And what this does is it connects the middle and lower registers, and you basically glissandi to the best of your ability downwards on the instrument, and it's usually followed by flexibility or strength exercises. It's kind of a preparatory study on connecting the low register, and later on it becomes. I misspoke before. Later on, this becomes what's called chord pedals, which is a Caruso exercise, not harmonics. And so basically, just and so I'm not letting my chops readjust to get to a note. It's simply bringing it down from the top. And so by making that glissandi happen, there's no way to reset without disrupting the sound. This would be played in all 7 positions. So now we get to some good stuff. This is called, you can't see it, but it's called noodles. And this is definitely a flexibility exercise. This is found in the Flexus book. It's called Chromatic Displacement. And it's found in papers that are sort of out there by James Clages. There's no name on them, but they're virtually identical to this. It is about flexibility and quick register change. It's also about training break areas once you get to E and staff and higher. And they're found in the middle parts of routines, and they usually alternate with strength exercises. But what the noodle is really good at, keeping your airflow steady, and then going up and down, and just moving quickly and with ease and with efficiency. Excuse me. They're done in a single breath. You can use a long setting. I guess if you do it in a single breath, it is the long setting. Frequently these are done, at least when you're learning them at first, you do them like half time, like and then you do double time. And that's definitely a Frink concept of doing things half time and then double time, triple time. Teach your body to do it slow, and then you can do it fast instead of trying to jump in fast. So I will demonstrate number A. And sometimes she would have you come back up as well. And then I guess I'll demonstrate B as well. Why not? And you can take these light speed if you wish. Another exercise related, it's called spiders. It's also found in the Flexus book, and something that is very similar to this is found on page 18 in the violin book, number 16. And it's only like the first, it's only A, is that's found in the violin book. But this is the same concept as before. But what we're doing is that each time we go, we're going in successively larger intervals, but we're having to do it in the same amount of time. And so in order to do that, the body has to move faster. But it's not simply just going faster, it's going faster at a perfect increment so that it's perfectly accurate. This is like the noodle we had before. It's a flexibility exercise. It's found in the same areas. Sometimes they're switched, sometimes they replace each other. Typically you only find like one. If you look in the Flexus book, these go like up to like high E, I think, and I think there's some that are like I think there's one that's like atonal in the Flexus book. There's a bunch of variations there. Sometimes you would tongue them. This is an interesting exercise to tongue because you use the concept of the slur, but then you're tonguing and you have to get the movement, and it involves a bunch of aspects that we've worked on earlier in our routine. And this was also sort of become a single and double time situation. In the Flexus book, there's like a coda to these exercises that's slightly different, but it's just a coda. There's just more variations in that. I guess I gotta play it, right? Etc.
We'll stop.
Want more? The question and answer. Okay, so now we move on to Flexando. This is like the harmonics exercise, and they sometimes they usually don't exist together. What I'm trying to say is that usually you'll usually have harmonics or Flexando. Flexando is more, I would say, a more advanced version, and it also, I guess, just depends on what mechanism you're training and what you're trying to bring about, what physical change you're trying to bring about. But what it is, these are found in Flexus, of course. It was probably contributed by Frink because they look basically identical to how they do in notes. It's a combination of a strength and a flexibility exercise. It trains a consistent focus and air through directional changes in the phrase. And so the important part of this is once you get to the top and you come back down, is that change in direction. These are found usually in the end of routines. You usually only get one of them. You play them in one breath. You play them in all 7 positions. And this is where we see the stick and a bicycle spokes analogy most often is in this. There's a variation of this that I found where she said try tonguing it. Don't know if that was a thing that happened more than not, but I found that in a sheet. So the idea behind this is in the 8th notes are in time, and then these 16th notes are essentially glissed. But it's not a rip. You want to hit all the notes. So do my best. Almost. So now we move to the cousin of this exercise, harmonics. This is a Caruso exercise. He calls it harmonic series, and I believe that's on like page 12, I think, in that book. And this is related to the Flexando in that you're also going through this harmonic series. But with harmonics, you're doing it fairly slowly, but you still want to make sure that you're not lurching in between, that you're not like slot, 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 but it's a slur that fully encompasses the center of those slots. Is the best way to describe it. This is done in long setting, and you don't use any extra fingers for each one. This version on the top, you find it's usually the first version that Frink would give, and then it would be this one that changes directions and comes back down. And the way that these Caruso exercises sort of coexist in routines is that the first one you get, well, there's 6 notes, but then the first hard one that you get is the interval study, and usually how high you end up getting in on that is how high she will have you do the harmonics, and it's also how high she will have you do the developed scale. And so if you're assigning these to yourselves or to other people, that's how you determine, how high do I go on my chromatic scale? How high do I go on harmonics? Well, you go as high as you got on your interval study. This is done with the long setting. It's found at the end of routines. It's a strength exercise. This is Caruso at its finest. Would be a harmonic.
Is that about the speed that she would have you play them?
Mm-hmm. She would, they would be at about that speed. What's interesting is that sometimes she would say, go faster on the way down, or go faster on the way up, or sometimes she would say, see if you can combine the Flexando and the harmonic, and say, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, we'll see, see where it gets the slipperiest, and then try to figure out how fast we can go, but still have it sound right. So it's definitely, the timing is linked with the air. But then once you have this air going and you have the aperture set, it's sort of really easy to like skate over all these harmonics and get through them. And so using that phenomenon of those things being in balance and then calibrating the body to use it.
Just in line with that, was it important for her that the Flexando, that the fast part would be in a precise relationship with the slower part?
Not necessarily. To be honest, there was not many flexandos happening. But I think in the Flexus book, it's notated to be there's like quarter notes to the eighth notes, but then you glitz between those quarter notes, hitting all the notes, sort of thing.
I see.
So, and I think, yeah, I think that you can never go wrong with trying to have more precision timing with any of this. Julie Lansman talks about is that there's a whistling analogy with these, and she would say, you know, some days when you're cut up, just whistle the harmonics, and that when you whistle, the jaw movement that you have is sort of the way that it would translate onto the mouthpiece. Now, I haven't experimented with that, really, but it's an interesting insight, I think, and how whistling is correlated with this. We're getting there. So now, we're getting to recovery exercises. And so these would pretty much happen always after any of these Caruso exercises that are really getting into the upper register. Pedals were a really important part of Frink's method, and she would always say that it's to remind. What she said? She said it would be to remind the body that it's the lips, not the instrument, that forms the notes. And she would also say it removes the right hand from the equation, which is something that I think trumpet players can relate to. But the pedal exercises, they would happen sort of wherever. They would always be after seconds. You would always have something after your interval study, and you definitely would probably have something at the end of your routine. And Julie Lansman talks about, you know, play pedals whenever you want. So we have two versions here. We have chromatic pedals, which are at the top, and you're simply just go down a half step, and then you tongue, go down another half step. Go down as low as you can into the pedal register. And with Frink, you're allowed to get out of position for pedal notes. So you don't have to do them all with your middle setting. You can do whatever you want to make the sound that's therapeutic for her. And down here we have bending pedals, which is glissandi between all these notes. The only caveat to being able to be out of position is that you always follow them with a chromatic scale reset, which I will talk about later. But chromatic pedals. Etc. And bending pedals. Etc. And these are recovery exercises. Play as low as possible with the correct pitch. So that's something that she would play with the piano as I was doing them. It'd be like, oh, you're losing it. That's a restop. So sort of like interval studies, you need to make sure that you're playing your things on purpose, and you're not just sort of throwing your body around. Yes.
And you still do long settings even with the pedal tones?
No.
Okay.
No, I would say I think unless it's an actual Caruso exercise, definitely do one of the Caruso exercises. I would say. But again, a case-by-case basis. I mean, if you're really working on trying to keep the same setting, she would probably say, do your pedals with the long setting. I would not be surprised if that's a thing that she would have said. Okay, and now we have chord pedals. Misleading because it has the word pedal in it, but it's not really a recovery exercise. It's kind of a combination. This is a Caruso exercise for sure, and it's done with a long setting. And you breath attack a high note, and then you come down the chord to a low note, and you take it through all 7 positions into the pedal register. And this is an interesting exercise that I definitely don't have a handle on yet, but it's interesting because when, you know, let's say I were to play seconds and I were to get to like A above high G, and so then now I'm going to go do my chord pedals, and so now I have to start with a breath attack open A pianissimo. And you'd be like, okay, get out of town. But after going through this routine and doing the recovery, then doing the pedal, and then finally you get to chord pedals, and you go, and like most of the time, it's like, good to go. And so it's interesting to the concept of breath attacking upper register notes, and then bringing that level of focus all the way down to the pedal register. And in that, this is, I think, a very, very interesting exercise, especially for connecting registers. There would never be a recovery exercise after this because it is one, because we go into the pedal register. And again, we have the concept of smooth transitions between notes. So we're not going ha 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 ha, but it's ah, and you're writing the air, and the physics of the instrument are making the slots happen, not you.
When you're playing the pedals, are you playing all valves down, or are you playing the actual fingering for the note as it would be an octave higher?
She said you can do whatever you want. There's probably a lot of benefit to using pedal fingerings, especially considering modern trumpet music. So yeah, whatever floats your boat. And yes, always a breath tech, as is. So, and then we have chromatic reset. This is done after pedal exercises. It's used to reset the embouchure, and this is, I guess the important part of this is, once again, the change in direction. You start at the bottom, you go up, and once you get up, then you change direction and come back down. And if that is a smooth transition and it's accurate, then it served its purpose. And this is something that is, it's the Clark concept, basically. This is in the back of his book, this exact exercise. And it's all about being able to do it with no tension, to be compact, to be accurate, to be fluid, to be responsive, and to do it. So, and she would have, she would say, normally you would just use like the normal fingering, but she would also say, sometimes she would say, why don't you try, if you have an issue with the coordination up there, you say, try using the fingerings from the Clark book. So like once you get above high C, D is open, and then it's like this, up to high G. And I found that that's really great for getting the coordination down of having all those notes and all the buttons right, because it can be really easy to, once you get that third finger involved, you can start to get all over the place, and because of this, not because of this. Cool. So those were the 10. Those are the 10 core exercises. Now the other thing we have is we have other material, and here's a list of things that I found in these lesson sheets. We have the Irons book, which is titled 27 Groups of Exercises for Cornet and Trumpet. Has a lot of flexibility, and the things that were assigned from that were mostly the flexibility. And we have violin lip flexibilities for all brass instruments, which is another flexibility book. We have the Edwin Goldman Practical Studies for the Trumpet, which etudes were taken from there. And we have the Ernest Williams Complete Modern Method for Trumpet. And we have the Bosquet. Does anyone know the first name of that author? Bonus point. Couldn't find it. 36 Celebrated Studies for Cornet. And so these are the modern publishers where you can find them from. So here we have order. And so what I've done here is at the top we have pre-existing routines, things that she would let you do, and at the bottom we have further daily practice, and in the middle we have sort of, this is what the lesson sheet would be that she gave, and I have it divided into thirds, and I have the things listed that would exist in those thirds. And so these are sort of like the modules of the system, and you can see in these sheets that she was always experimenting with the order in which to do things, but in general they were always existing in these thirds. So it was organized experimentation. That's what I said. Yeah. That's great. Does anybody have any questions about what I have here? This is sort of a way of to tie together the last numerous white slides.
Did she always advocate doing your pre-existing routine before?
No, that's a good question, because I think the majority of students who she had, and I would guess the majority of students that are, don't really have a set routine that they do in the morning, or don't really have like a thing that they do every day. They sort of get the horn out and see where they are. And so most people were using it as their warm-up too, and which is fine, because it starts at a very basic level. But people like me who do their thing, she would say, don't mess with it.
When you were doing it, you were doing mostly Thompson before were you doing Thompson?
Yeah.
Before, because I believe that was contiguous with this time you were studying with
Yes.
me at NYU, and
Yes,
tried to
and
get
I've been
to
doing Thompson for like 6 years since then, before that.
Yeah, and so in that case, you think it was like that was more compatible with her stuff, or did she ever mention anything about Thompson?
No, I think the only thing she
Just
mentioned.
whatever you're doing, do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she was like, I mean, I guess the conversation was, do you do stuff other than this? And I said, yes, this is what I do. She said, okay, cool. Would you be okay next week with coming, having not done it? And then she said, today went great. Now try not doing it for a week. And then that was a great week.
Any recordings from that week?
No, they don't exist.
Do that one.
I think I actually injured myself that week. So we're wrapping this up. Notable observations. So here are the things that I found in my research, and that in the Frink method, she employed a conservative number of exercises. They were scalable in difficulty. They were modular in terms of the order of appearance. They only occupied part of your daily practice. She drew heavily from the established literature, and she focused on the process and form rather than achievement in the things she assigned. And so I think that these are the big take-homes of the method. So here we have it. So the conclusion I came to is that Laurie Frink's method, her remarkable success was in her analysis and prescription rather than in generation of unique material, and that she had this ability to sit down with a student and figure out exactly what they were having trouble with, and then she had in her back pocket this group of things that would help those things get better, and would say, okay, we're going to do these, how are they happening? Students would always come with all their lesson sheets. You could say, this is what you did this day, this is what we did last week, this is what was the week before, how did we progress, how did we get to where we are now? So it's like a medical history for your chops, basically. Her method, the 10 core exercises, and her system was utilizing aspects from Caruso, which are the Caruso rules, calisthenic training, aspects from Schlossberg, which are daily drills, and assigning unique routines to students, and aspects from the established literature, which are, we have our etudes, we have everything she drew from. And then here we have, this is a citation for my paper that is just about out of the breach. So, we have references, questions?
I'll start with one. So, my question actually comes to how she would use some of these in lessons and how she would spend time with lessons. So she would write out these sheets. You would presumably go practice that material as part of your day each day. You come back to the next lesson. Would you play through all of the material from your sheet to show her how you're progressing on each thing, or how would that go?
So the way it would work, I don't think I ever played everything that was on my sheet from the week before. And I think that if I were to look back, the things I didn't play would probably be the things that she didn't change for the following week. But we would sit down, it would always start with, how's it going, how are things, what are you up to? And then she'd be like, okay, let's hear the buzzing. And I'd be like, well, I need to have a G, so I'll play a G, that was bad, all right, let's buzz. And then she'd be like, okay, interesting. And then every once in a while, when what she was trying to have you do worked, like for example, when I was doing like the first violin exercise and like the low G slotted, she like jumped out of her chair. It was like, yes! And then I stopped playing. What happened? Because she would sit there and be like, she was like a psychiatrist. She was like, and then all of a sudden she'd be like, yes! And she would always, she had like this red chair with metal here, and so you'd be doing Caruso, and she would tap the subdivision if you weren't doing it right. So you were like, if she's tapping, you're not doing it right, so do it right. So it was always an interesting experience. And then, but yeah, so in answer to your question, you wouldn't always play everything, but I don't think that she would change things you didn't play. And it was never, I never left a lesson feeling like I was in the ditch chop-wise either. It was always, it was a very rewarding experience to be in there with her, because you would go on being like, I can't play, and you'd leave feeling like, I got this, so.
Could you go back 2 slides?
This one?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I guess to piggyback on top of that question, so, and you would play these 10 core exercises, etudes and such were separate from that, is that right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't do those, you told me that very often, is that right, or how?
Right, they weren't assigned very often. Like I think like in my 3rd lesson, I got like this Goldman, the first page of it. She would give me both pages, and then the next lesson played that, then didn't really have an etude for a while, and then a couple months later, some Williams thing, we just got the first page again, of course, And she was mean like that. She'd be like, here's the first page, just do the first page.
Can you share any observations or conclusions? I mean, or maybe just rephrase them, because I know they're in the paper and what you said before about, so she asked for how's the buzzing going, or how are the bands going, and you do it, and so any conclusions about what actually it is she's looking for in, because I would imagine if one thing was going well, she'd say, okay, let me hear this, right?
Right.
And she'd probably go on to another aspect that
Right.
would maybe, is there anything that corresponds to your like beginning, middle, the thirds that you've categorized the whole routine into, like if she would be asking for things that would correspond to each of those areas, or will she stick in one area? Any sense of that?
I think that it's an interesting question, and I think that she would definitely use the past lesson sheets as sort of saying, okay, here's what we've been working on, and here are the weak points, and she would definitely address those. And so so for example, when I would do a free buzz, she'd say, oh great, you've got a lot of room on that now. So now let's hear you do seconds now. And I'm pretty sure that she picked seconds because it was like, oh, you've got a bunch of room, let's see if that improved the centering.
Room meaning what?
Sorry?
Room, what does room mean?
I think what that meant was that in my free buzz, in the half step, it sounded like I had a lot of space to work with, as opposed to it being brittle and unstable.
Room always, does that always kind of mean having smoothness in between pitch centers?
Yes, and I think that's exactly what she was
I
referring
think
to.
that's kind of
as
a crux of a lot of these things having to do is that you have a continuous thing between pitch centers.
Right.
That's the commonality between this and Thompson, right? It's like what Tom Stevens talks about there's the two different concepts of mouthpiece buzzing, for instance, or the ones with sharp centers, a la Stamp, and then the smooth centers, a la Thompson. And he talks about sometimes about doing the Stamp exercises like Thompson and the Thompson
Right.
exercises like Stamp.
Right.
So, but it's that. So everything is pretty smooth. Nothing much was said about breathing in these lessons.
No, no, I don't think that was something that. I guess if you weren't taking a good breath, she would let you know, and she would probably say, take a breath. But I never really found anything directly relating to breathing.
Any if I put it out there like that since the Caruso rules involve nose breathing, and there's something about nose breathing, I think that sort of compels you to breathe in a certain way. Then maybe
I can see that.
you don't get into the, it definitely is not like, relaxed, open flow in the same
Right.
sort of sense of Jacob's sort of sense.
Right, and she was
Of
never a fan of,
Pintarello, that
like,
if you're
tanking up
breathing,
either.
if you're breathing through the nose, you can only move it so quickly.
Right. Yeah, and she was never a fan of really like tanking up. She's it was
Right.
because when we're doing these exercises, it's all about like the efficiency and the accuracy, and just like and it wasn't about the.
Do you think like playing softly as in the as in the 6 notes, like translates to playing small?
That's an interesting question, and I think I've definitely observed the sort of the opposite focus of Caruso versus Thompson in that if you do a lot of Caruso, it tends to tighten you up and you tend to play, like you say, small.
It can,
and then if you do a lot of other things like maybe Stamp or something else, then maybe you can get really open and then you no longer have efficiency or.
Yeah, I think the one thing to
Push and
mention
pull.
here for those who aren't acquainted with Thompson is that a lot of Thompson uses Caruso rules.
Exactly. Yeah.
In other words, breathing through the nose, in, out 1, 2, in 3, 4, in the rest measure and so on.
Yeah, and I think with Thompson, I guess this is probably a topic for someone else's lecture on paper, but is that you can resonate more with a small aperture if you have it balanced than with a big one because of efficiency. fire hose principle.
There's a place where, I think there's a place where that meets Caruso, and maybe that's where Laurie's place is.
Mhm.
Because it sounds almost like it's right in the center of between Caruso
Right.
and Thompson, it's like that.
Right.
I have a question about, the focus on process and form rather than
Mhm.
achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there so that like you're not, so disappointed when you don't get the results you want? Or is that because you're not supposed to be like physically, like consciously changing things to get the sound you want, or like working
Right.
too hard?
I think Marcus Stockhausen puts it really well in the basic Crusoe. He says that on days when things are going well, push yourself, but on days when they're not going well, don't be hard on yourself. And I think that with that, the direct answer to your question would be that it's to sort of say, I'm going to sit. Yesterday I did this on this exercise, so today I should be able to do this or more. And that's kind of an unhealthy approach in this situation, because you say yesterday I got to here, and I did this, and I did the form right. So today it doesn't really matter where I get to as long as I do the form right.
But like, say you're doing like the 6-note exercise,
Mhm.
and like, the sound isn't good. Like it's, the first note sounds how you would normally play an F or
Mhm.
whatever it is. And then you're going up dramatically and it sounds worse.
Mhm.
Are you gonna be consciously making adjustments to try to match the sound? Or are you just focusing on like keeping everything the same as?
Yeah.
Well, Caruso is famous for saying play with abandon, and to not really pay attention to the sound that's happening. I think that in the situation you talk about, that the sound not being good or getting worse, I think doesn't matter so long as you're obeying the 4 rules. And so I guess what my statement says is that focus on that rather than the sound in this situation. And then if you're focusing on am I obeying the rules, am I doing it right, it's different than am I doing it well.
Mhm.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, I believe it's Narcisse Bousquet.
Narcisse?
Narcissus.
Whoa. Never heard anybody
DMA.
say his first
You
name.
get to freak out.
I was gonna say Akio.
I am SLT.
Doctor.
Interval study, would she always start off with seconds?
Yes.
And you would then progress to other intervals, and if so,
Yes.
what would be
Yes.
the?
Come on, he's got to get the camera.
What would be the reason for progressing?
If it's balanced, if you're not struggling, if you can play the intervals well.
So the wider intervals are viewed as more challenging.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The camera has to go somewhere else, so we have to wrap it up.
All right.
Thank you.
Great job.